Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about data visualization within gaming and how gathering information within a game allows a player to achieve their objectives. In the real world, we use our senses to gather information from the world around us and achieve objectives that way. An example might be putting your hand into the shower to find out if the water is too cold or too hot, or maybe putting your hand over a hot pan to find out if it's ready or not to cook food. So in games, we use information as a tool to achieve our objectives. Our objectives might be things like how Mario simply has to make it from the beginning of the level to the end of the level. That's the simple task that needs to be completed, but to do that task, we need visual information that allows Mario to get over the jumps or over enemies within his way. In Mario Kart for Nintendo 64, the player is given a lot of visual information in order to complete their task. Using this raw data allows the player to sort of formulate a plan in order to achieving a better spot within the race. So, on screen, we have a position in the bottom left-hand corner, which shows whether or not they're first, second, fifth, sixth, etc., etc. And on the right side of the screen, we're shown a map that's an overhead view and a 2D representation of the 3D space in which the player occupies. This 2D representation simplifies things and allows the player to have a better understanding of the spatial area around them. So we can see that all the players are represented here, as well as the main player, and understand, even though that may be in first, they can also see whether or not the rest of the players are far behind them or very, very close. It's very possible though, just because your game falls within a certain format, it doesn't mean that you should use the same data visualization as someone else. In the game F-Zero X for Nintendo 64, players need to make it from the beginning of a race to the end of the race, but there's also another added element, which is they have to make it there alive. So at the top right hand side of the screen, there's a boost bar that shows how much energy a player has left. If this boost bar depletes, then the race is over. Bumping into the sides of the screen causes this boost bar to deplete, as well as using the boost ability that speeds up the game. So what information is important here? Well, this game is third person, so the camera is behind the player and shows what's upcoming within the stage. I actually had to search whether or not there was a map in this game because I looked at it so rarely. There is a map, by the way, but the information on it is just not as important as the boost bar or what's immediately happening in front of the player. So while creating a game, developers have to take into account what is actually the most crucial information that will allow this player to get through the game. We live in a stereoscopic world, meaning that we can understand depth, whereas games work in a monoscopic way, meaning that they don't really have depth. They may be able to create the illusion of 3D, but it's not really there. More so, imagine games working on the principle of trying to hit a baseball with one eye closed. You can understand that the baseball is 3D, but you don't really understand how far away it actually is. So game developers sort of have to take this into account while developing their games. It might make sense for a game to be 3D, but if your information has a lot to do with distances, depths of things, and how far away things are, you might want to consider a 2D game. And that's not to say that 3D is necessarily bad. 3D games allow the player to explore to a more immersive content, but 2D games allow players to get information more quickly. So 2D might make sense for games that are more quick-paced and where visual information is absolutely crucial for them being able to achieve their objective, whereas 3D games might make more sense for things that are slower. So let's talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary information. Primary information being the information that is absolutely required for someone to be able to complete a task. So in the case of maybe the game of basketball, a player must know where the hoop is to be able to shoot towards it, whereas the secondary information might be the specifics as to knowing how high it is. It might help them planning out the action, but they just really need to be able to visually see the hoop. Primary information should always be available to the user, whereas secondary information and tertiary information should just be information that is useful but not necessarily required to play the game. To understand tertiary information, let's look at Metal Gear Solid 2, which uses a lot of tertiary information as well as secondary information. The player must navigate a space while avoiding enemy units who have patrol routes and have a cone of vision that they can see you in. So to avoid these encounters, the player needs to know the positions of the enemy units as well as their cones of vision. We're shown this in a 2D way, but if we take this away, the game becomes something different, which requires the player to use their skills at hand to be able to access this information. So by using the camera as a way of data visualization, the player can find this information out. This is where creative mediums sort of spawn off from a lot of other things that people interact with on a daily basis. You can hide information from someone and still have it be a complete experience by removing information and making the person think and use resources to figure out puzzles. You can craft more interesting experiences. Granted, by this, you can also possibly alienate people, which is where the idea of tastes and preferences start to come in, but it can find more of a niche audience that resonates more with your design.